Welcome to The Explainer. We're going to dive into a pretty incredible story today. It's really about time, about loss, and what happens when you become a stranger in your own life. Okay, let's start with just one number, 30. 30 years. I mean, that's an entire generation, right? Just stop and think about the world back in the early 90s compared to today. It's enough time for absolutely everything you know to just change completely. So, what happens when your world just vanishes for 3 decades? Well, today, we're going to explore that exact question through the life of one man who actually lived it. And his story, wow, it really makes you stop and think about what freedom even means when everything and everyone you once knew is just gone.
All right, so let's get into it. A life interrupted. This is Madhukar Magar. And back in 1993, when he was just 26 years old, his entire life was turned completely upside down.
So, what happened? He was accused of treason against the state of Bhutan, and that meant he became what's called a political prisoner, basically, someone locked up for their political beliefs. And just like that, his whole world was about to shrink down to the size of a prison cell. So, how did this all go down? Let's look at the path that led him to prison. You see, by 1991, he and his family had already fled Bhutan. They were refugees living in Nepal. But then, just 2 years later, he makes a trip back to Bhutan to visit some relatives, and that visit turned into a 30-year prison sentence. He was arrested right then and there. 30 years inside. He was sent to Bhutan's Chemgang prison, and that's where he would spend the next 3 decades. Just let that sink in for a second. He spent more of his life locked up than he'd spent free as a grown man. You know, for years, he had this one lifeline to the outside world. His wife, Saraswati, would visit him in prison. But then, in 2014, they just stopped. That connection was cut. And the silence must have been deafening. All right, the long road home. Then, fast forward to August 2023. And just as suddenly as his life had stopped, it started again. At 57 years old, Madhukar was released. But this wasn't some happy reunion, not at all. His release came with a really harsh directive from the officials. They basically told him, "You have no relatives in Bhutan. Go straight to Nepal. Maybe someone is in the refugee camps there." In other words, you don't belong here anymore. Get out. So with just a small amount of money he'd managed to earn from making tools in prison, things like sickles and knives, he made his way to the Beldangi refugee camp in Nepal. He was holding on to this one hope, to finally reunite with the family he hadn't seen in almost 30 years. A world without family. But the world he was walking back into, it wasn't the one he left. The family he was so desperate to see, they were gone. 30 years is a long, long time, and absolutely everything had changed. And the reality he found was just devastating. I mean, look at this. Back in 1993, he had a wife, 2 kids, his parents. Now, in 2023, the only person left in the camp was his brother. His entire immediate family was just gone. He found out that his wife, his kids, his parents, they weren't there anymore. In his own words, all of them had flown to America. While he was locked away, his entire family had been resettled in the United States as part of a refugee program. You can just feel how disoriented he is. He said, "I feel like I've arrived somewhere completely different." Can you imagine? After 30 years, he's basically a guest in his own life, a complete stranger in the place he used to call home. The prisoners left behind. So Madhukar's story is obviously incredibly powerful. But for him, it's not just about his own experience. He needs the world to know that he isn't the only one. His focus has totally shifted now to the other men who are still locked away in that same prison. He's taken on this duty to remember them. He's planning to meet with other released prisoners, and his absolute first priority is to find the families of the guys still inside. He wants to deliver messages to the relatives of men like Bhakti Bahadur Chamling, Omat Adhikari, and Sukhman Magar. He's become this human link to a world they've been completely cut off from. And he thinks there could be around 3 dozen others still in there. And this is where international pressure really comes into play. You have activists pointing out this huge contradiction. Bhutan is famous for its gross national happiness index, right? This idea that they measure their country's success by the happiness of their people. But as Ram Karki, an international campaign coordinator, says, it's urgent that a nation proclaiming to be happy releases these political prisoners. It's a pretty stark contrast. And it's not just a few. Campaigners have a list of at least 37 known political prisoners still inside Chemgang, and the appeal is for their immediate, unconditional release.
So when you step back and look at this whole thing, he's been released from prison, sure, but now he's a stranger in the world. So how does a life even restart from here? Madhukar Magar isn't in a cell anymore, but you could say he's still a prisoner of time, adrift in a world he no longer recognizes. And that leaves us with this really big question. When you've lost 3 decades of your life, how in the world do you even begin again?